Hello you amazing people, welcome back to RXMemes. Today we are jumping into r/prorevenge again, and I just wanted to let you know that if we can get today's video to 1,000 likes, I will have a 1-hour special on prorevenge for you coming on Tuesday. If you like today's content, please consider subscribing. It is free and it helps out my channel a lot. If you want to touch base with me, my socials are on the screen. I love hearing from you and I reply every single time, and let me know what you think about today's video. Without further ado, let's get right into the stories. How I got revenge on my cheating ex. Hello Reddit. I don't really know where this post should go, but prorevenge seemed like a safe bet. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and please enjoy. It's a long one, but hopefully it'll be worth it. TLDR at the bottom. This story takes place almost 12 years ago, so I'll do my best with the dialogue and details, but admittedly some things are a little fuzzy. Most of my life I've had a problem with picking men that were not good for me, so much so that I even had a phrase for it: saving the world one moron at a time. One of my more spectacularly bad choices was a guy by the name of Bob. Obviously not his real name. I met Bob when I was working one of my 2 jobs at the local mall. He worked somewhere else in the mall, so we hit it off, and soon enough we were in a relationship. Within a few months my lease was up and we ended up moving in together, which obviously in hindsight was a huge mistake, but I was dumb and lonely. Soon enough, red flags began to fly. He would say things in common conversation that were simply incorrect. Like there's only 4 continents and the rest are actually owned by the Martian government and thus don't count, etc. And when challenged, would circular talk you until you either agreed with him or dropped the subject. He also made claims that seemed entirely unbelievable, such as when I asked where he had been staying prior to his mom's house, he said he camped in the woods. When I asked how he did that for months on end without any gear, he simply gestured to himself and said, "This is all the gear I need." The worst trait, though, by far, was his epic laziness. I have never witnessed someone so lazy in my life. Bob was unemployed for over a third of our relationship and would simply sit in the apartment watching Netflix or playing some war game on his computer, aka my spare computer, typing away in the group chat. He would never clean up after himself, leaving dirty dishes in the sink and filth on every surface while only taking a shower maybe once a week. The smell that permeated my apartment could only be described as revolting and could easily gag a maggot. I would inquire a few times a week on his job hunt, only to be dismissed or given a growing amount of excuses such as, "But I don't have a car, how would I get there? The bus doesn't run in that area. The internet went down so I couldn't apply," etc., etc. Meanwhile, I'm working double and triple shifts at my job trying to make up the lost income and running him all over town in my time off, getting applications and helping him fill them out and turn them in. Keep in mind, he doesn't have a cell phone, so all of these apps have my contact info on them. Thus begins the era of him holding my phone while I'm at work, so he can make calls or schedule interviews, as well as I can get a hold of him from my store phone if I needed to. Things began getting weird. He began staying up later and later on this group chat, sometimes till almost dawn. Sometimes he would hang out all evening until it was time for bed. Then he would always make some excuse on why he needed to check the game before bed, and he'd be right there. Hours would pass. No Bob. I began to get suspicious, but nothing incriminating seemed to be taking place, so I shrugged it off as me being insecure. Then he started asking to use my car to go see his best friend Ben. Now I wasn't super comfortable with this, but I did know Ben pretty well, and we got along almost better than Bob and I did. So I guess, to a degree, I trusted Ben more than Bob and agreed to it. This happened a few times while I was working the evening shift, and he was always back at the allotted time with my car and my phone, and relatively grateful for the opportunity to hang with his buds. Suspicious? Yes. But I'm the kind of person that is loyal and trusting to a fault and don't assume anything without proof, and from every angle, all seemed to be on the up and up, so I took it at face value. So one day, he asks to borrow my car and go with his friends to a card gaming tournament. He put on a great show telling me how the prize money would help us out, and with the deck he had, there's no way he could lose. I just had to let him use my car and phone, this one last time, and he would be able to buy himself a phone with the prize money. I wasn't a huge fan of the idea, but nothing untoward had occurred in the previous instances, and I didn't feel like spending my only day off at a card game convention that I literally couldn't care less about, so I acquiesced. I bought myself a couple of green monsters and some vodka and had my own little personal drunk party. Hours ticked by and no Bob. Eventually, I passed out, only to wake up at the crack of dawn violently sick. This went way beyond a hangover. I start retching in the bathroom until there was nothing left but bile, but the retching wouldn't stop. Hours ticked by and I lay in my bathroom floor sweating and convulsing with no phone, no car, no Bob. I eventually was able to crawl to my room and wrap myself in a bathrobe before crawling down my apartment building stairs and began knocking on the closest doors. It took 3 apartments before someone opened the door and allowed me to use their phone to call my mom. My mother was at my apartment in 6 minutes flat and rushed me to the ER where I was diagnosed with an aggressive and antibiotic-resistant strain of C. diff. Bob finally showed up later that afternoon, phone and car keys in hand, looking very concerned and claiming to be deeply apologetic, but my mom hated him from that point on. I was out of the hospital and back to work within a few days, but it was the beginning of the end. During these last months, we were constantly scraping by due to his lack of consistent income and poor spending habits. There were jobs gotten and there were jobs lost for various reasons throughout our relationship, but the final job was the one that I helped him get literally 3 buildings down from my own workplace. This company rents furniture and electronics on a weekly, monthly basis, and I happen to know most of the employees and the hiring manager as they are regular customers at my coffee establishment. I was able to use what little sway I had to get him on there, and he accepted a job as the delivery man. Within a few weeks, I come home from work to find a brand new TV and entertainment system and him grinning like an idiot. I tell him we can't afford this, we can barely afford to eat and are surviving off scraps I bring home from work. He talks about his amazing employee discount and assures me it's no big deal, that the rental fee will just come out of his check, etc. I was pissed. Not only had he not consulted me, he also had me on the account as well. My info had been taken from the credit app I filled out as a favor to help their numbers. So if he flaked, I was liable. Fast forward another few weeks. The rent is late and we are receiving eviction notices on our door. I come home from work and the TV is mysteriously gone. Thank goodness, I think. He finally realized we can't afford it and took it back. He gets paid, rent gets paid, and all is good as can be. Until I found a pawn slip for the TV in his pocket as I was doing laundry and went ballistic. He assured me he had plans to get it back in the works and to not worry about it. It will be taken care of soon and no one will be the wiser. I was too pissed to catch on to the secrecy aspect of the situation. A few more tense weeks go by with him working mornings and myself working evenings while we shared one phone and car, until that fateful day arrived. I woke up that morning with a migraine headache and opted to let Bob take the car, but leave me the phone so I can call someone later on for a ride to work. A few hours of uncomfortable sleep go by before I'm awoken by my phone. I answer the phone still groggy. Hello? There is a long pause on the other end of the line until a female voice asks, is Bob there? I felt a sickening feeling in my gut and began to shake. Is this real? Am I dreaming? No, he's at work right now. This is his wife. Total lie, but hey, is there something I can help you with? I wasn't rude. I phrased it as a genuine question rather than an accusation. Another long pause before she began to stammer about maybe she had the wrong number, but it was obvious she just wanted to get off the phone with me as quickly as possible, and I realized in that moment that I desperately needed her. Please, I said with an edge of desperation in my voice. I don't know what's going on, but I just really need someone to tell me the truth. The last word came out in a sob, and I sat there for a moment in silence, trying to quell the urge to just cry uncontrollably. Listen, the voice on the other end was almost gentle. I need to make a few phone calls, but I promise you that I will call you back. She said it calmly and with so much conviction that I really wanted to believe her. Please, you promise? I almost begged. I promise, she replied. Okay. I took a deep breath and released it. I'll talk to you soon, and hung up. I then proceeded to aggressively pace my living room floor, staring at my phone while chain smoking and muttering to myself like a crazy person. I knew who she was calling. I was replaying all those little red flag moments in my head from the last few months, pinning down dates or behavior I'd found suspect when the phone rings again. It's her. I froze for a moment, shocked she followed through and called back, terrified of what this meant. I answered the phone and what followed was the most soul-crushing 45 minutes of my life. After initial introductions, June, again not the real name, and I began comparing stories, and it became glaringly obvious what was happening. They had actually been in a relationship several years prior and had run back into each other on the aforementioned war game where they began to flirt on group chat. All those nights he'd been on the computer, he'd been chatting with her. All those times he'd go hang out with his friends, he'd been using my car to take her out and my phone to communicate with her. The time I was sick and alone with no resources, you guessed it, he was with her. Oh, but it gets better. "Do you have a little silver hummingbird necklace?" she inquired. "Yes, my mother gave it to me for my 27th birthday. Actually, I love it." "Really?" she said. "'Cause he gave me one for Mother's Day." Oh my gosh, I almost yelled into the phone as I ran into my room and tore through my jewelry box. It wasn't there. It was around her neck. From there we discovered, not only had he been giving her my property as gifts, but he'd had her over to our apartment passing it off as his own. I didn't want to believe him capable of doing something so cruel and disrespectful when I have allowed him to sponge off me for the better part of 3 years. Unfortunately, as in confirmation, she began describing my apartment to a T, all the way down to my bed sheets. June said he even pulled my secret box from beneath my bed and offered to use my adult items on her. She said she found it weird and didn't partake, but I threw them away due to the sheer ick factor. Finally, she uttered the words I didn't know I wanted to hear. "You know what we should do? We should bust him together." My mind immediately started racing. Indeed we should. It was a mix of fury, adrenaline, and despair, so my thinking wasn't exactly straight, and details begin to get hazy here. We arranged to meet up at my work and find a way to lure Bob over there. But unfortunately, she lived about 40 minutes away, whereas I only live about 6 miles from our destination. So if I got there first, I'd need to stall him, assuming he wasn't out on a delivery. I called a trusted coworker of mine at work, sobbing and begging for a ride. To his everlasting credit, he got somebody to cover and left work to come get me and bring me my car. When I got to Bob's workplace, I went inside to retrieve my keys. This isn't uncommon, as they know the car is mine, and I was stopped halfway through the store by Bob's manager wanting to talk about the payment due on our account. I don't remember the exact dialogue, but I said something along the lines of, "Look, I don't know when you're going to get your payment." I looked utterly defeated and told him we could never afford the TV in the first place, and how I had begged Bob to take it back, and now we don't have it anymore as Bob has pawned it, and I don't have the money to get it out, let alone pay him. I was full on blubbering at this point when he stopped me to clarify that his employee pawned a rental TV under contract. I confirmed that this was indeed true and presented him with the pawn ticket. He was mad. Apparently such an act is illegal and is terms for immediate termination, but he assured me that if I could get the TV back for him, there would be no harm, no foul, and he would terminate my contract without any penalties. I thanked him for his understanding and told him to let Bob know I would be over at my workplace. My heart is pounding in my chest and blood is roaring in my ears. What was I going to say? What was he going to say? Would June make it there before he did? My heart sinks when I see Bob's hulking form making its way in my direction. I frantically scan the parking lot for June's car, but she's not here yet and I'm out of time. He hits the door looking out of breath and guilty as hell, and I just stare at him stone-faced. I walk outside silently to light a cigarette, unsure of exactly what to say, and he follows me wordlessly outside. He starts in with the, "It's not what it seems," and "It's all just a terrible misunderstanding." And I just let him dig himself deeper into his hole of lies. I listen, I nod, I pretend to understand until a particular car pulls into view. June parks in the space directly next to where we were standing and gets out of the car. "Hey Bob, how you doing?" Bob has gone visibly pale. He hangs his head and sits down on the curb, saying nothing to either of us. June and I greet each other and awkwardly shake hands before again returning our attention to Bob. June begins berating him on his lies and deceit, unveiling all of our mutual info and subsequent conclusions while I stood mostly in silence, agreeing at the appropriate times, but mostly still in shock. After 20 minutes of this, I finally mustered up the courage to take my stand. "We are done. I don't want to see you ever again. I'll pack up your things, only 2 boxes worth, and your sister can contact me in a few days to pick them up. Now I want your key." I held out my hand and looked at him. "Not until I get my stuff out, then you get your key," he replied. I tried to argue, but he continued to refuse and use his large stature to his advantage, knowing I'd have no choice in a physical altercation. He turned and walked away, heading back toward his workplace. June and I talked a little more before she handed me my hummingbird necklace and left. I stood there alone, staring at nothing, trying to wrap my head around what had just transpired, and then I cried. Oh, how I cried. With nowhere else to turn, I had only one call to make. To my mom. The moment she answered, I unleashed this deluge of words at her that were half sobs and half rant. "Stay right there, I'm coming," she said. God bless my mother. Soon enough, both my parents pull up in my dad's truck and my mom gets out to comfort me and give me hugs. I look at the driver's seat and see my father with his jaw is clenched in a death grip on the steering wheel while staring straight ahead. Oh crap. They take me to the pawn shop and my parents write a check for more than $500 to get the TV out. We then drive straight over to Bob's workplace and return the TV to the manager. As the manager finishes up the cancellation paperwork, my dad spots Bob pacing around the back of the parking lot talking frantically on the phone. Unfortunately, I didn't get to hear the ensuing conversation, but my dad returns within a few minutes holding my house key and looking victorious. "I believe this is yours," he says as he hands me the key and pulls me into a hug, and I cried a little into his shoulder. My dad gave me a squeeze, kissed my temple, and whispered into my ear, "They're firing him." I leaned back, looked at my dad, and just smirked and said, "Now he's jobless and homeless." I thought about it for a second before I said in my most sarcastic tone, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." We laughed about it a little and my parents gave me some words of wisdom before leaving me to drive myself home, where my best friend was already waiting to keep me company. Bob and his sister showed up a few days later for his pitiful boxes of stuff. He tried to talk to me to explain, but my best friend descended on him like a harpy if he muttered more than a few syllables in my direction, so he was shut down almost immediately. He left that night and I have never heard from him since. I blocked him on social media, but there was really no need as he made no effort to contact me on any level. That's Bob. Ever lazy, ever deluded, and always an asshole. So here I am, many years later, happily married to my high school sweetheart and the mother of 2 beautiful little boys, and grateful to have moved on when I did. The experience with Bob certainly took its toll. I lost a lot of weight due to lack of appetite, but had a myriad of trust issues moving forward. But the point is I moved forward. I have grown leaps and bounds as a person since this experience and am truly content with where my life is now. But every now and then when I'm drifting off to sleep, I can't help but wonder, whatever happened to good old Bob? Is he out there somewhere in the woods with a stick and his wits as his only gear, waiting for a Martian government to make its move? Oh well, a girl can dream. Thank you so much for reading and I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to message me with any questions or comments. Oh my gosh, I'm so angry for this girl, but I also am so glad that Bob was cheating on her with June, because June is like a grade A hero in my books. Any girl who's gonna side with the other girl, there are too many girls who would just ignore it and like, you know the girls that I'm talking about. But this girl and June together to ruin Bob's life, I'm living for. Could you imagine? Oh my gosh. I was stressed out just reading the story. Bob seems so irresponsible and delusional. Not necessarily about the Martian government, because we can all believe whatever we want. But when somebody is like, just like a straight up liar and so disrespectful to use your property and to be treating them so shitty, it's ridiculous, especially with what he did with the TV. Like, oh, I've met people like this. I might have dated some people like this, and I'm so glad that they're not in my life anymore. OP really dodged a bullet. I think what Bob really needs is just like a mother figure to make him sandwiches, like Grandma's Boy. Is that what I'm thinking about? Found my girlfriend was cheating on me with a close friend, so I had him arrested and ghosted her. So I am a longtime Redditor and decided to tell you a story that has only just come to its final conclusion. I have created a secondary Reddit account specifically for this, as I want to protect those that are not a part of the Reddit community and change the names of all involved. Please tell me if this is not appropriate in r/prorevenge and needs to be moved elsewhere, as I have never been part of this sub before, but friends had suggested I put it here. Apologies if there is any spelling or grammar mistakes. TLDR will be at the bottom, but hold on to your hats and this is going to be a long one. Backstory. Incoming sadness. My wife Rachel and I grew up in a largish town of close to 30,000 people. We knew each other at an early age, roughly 6 or 7, can't specifically remember. We were practically inseparable. At 16, we started dating each other. When we turned 18, we moved away for work in a city just a few hours drive away. By 20, we were married and had bought our first house. At 22, we discovered that she was pregnant with a boy. It was then disaster struck. About 5 weeks before she was due to go on maternity leave, a large shelving unit collapsed and crushed her. I was told that both her and our child were killed instantly. 2 of her colleagues had also been injured in the accident, one left paralyzed, the other losing his leg after it had to be amputated. The company she was working for had, in a cost-cutting measure, decided to continue using old shelving that had been written off as unsafe instead of replacing it. I still haven't quite forgiven those executives and management personnel that made that decision, because they cut short the love of my life as well as killing our unborn child. It wasn't long after I was told they had a choice on how to proceed with what their company called compensation, but I called it blood money. They wanted to settle out of court to avoid a lawsuit. I, on the other hand, was out for their blood. Just to clarify, this is not the revenge, this is still backstory. Fortunately, due to the coverage that it got, and involving several politicians, this case was settled quickly in court, roughly 3 years, in which the payout for all parties was close to 10 times the amount they had initially offered. A lot of fines were given to them for breaches on work, health, and safety. Executives were sacked, others were jailed, etc. A story for another time maybe, when I feel comfortable sharing. In this time, I was still working my job in telecommunications. My mother, bless her soul, had moved in while all this was happening to help me. I think I would have fallen apart if she hadn't been as involved as she was. It was around this time I was offered a promotion, but it involved a lot of travel around the state. I made a request to have an office in my hometown's branch, as I wanted to not only take care of businesses in the state, but in my hometown also, as there was no business representative located there, to which they agreed. After a few months, we settled into a routine of 1 to 2 weeks in the city office, 1 week in my hometown, and 1 to 2 weeks visiting the rest of the state. After a year, I decided to buy a house in my hometown, so I wasn't having to stay at my parents' place every week or so that I was home, and that I could come and go as I pleased. This is important for later in the story. It is about 4 years later that our story begins. Sorry if the backstory was a bit long. I had just returned from one of my trips on Friday and was checking in some stuff at my office when Harry, the branch's managing director, walked in. We had grown up together also, but had gone to different schools, but since coming back had developed a very close friendship. He asked how things were, and then asked if I wanted to come to a house party that he was having that evening. Short notice and all, but I said yes. I felt like a few drinks with friends were in order. It was there that Harry introduced me to Catherine. She was a new hire at the branch where my hometown's office was located and was getting to know everyone being new in town. We hit it off immediately. As much of a cliche as it sounds, it was almost as if Rachel was in front of me instead of Catherine. I won't bore you too much with the details, but after 2 years of dating, we decided to take it to the next step and she moved into my hometown's house. Everything up to this point had been going really well. Catherine and my parents got along, and Rachel's parents also approved and were happy that someone could make me just as happy as Rachel had done. All was going well for close to a year when things began to change. Skype sessions were cut short suddenly. Neighbors would tell me about how a car, described to me like it was Harry's, was always seen parked in the back alley near my house whenever I was away. Some clothes that weren't mine were in my wardrobe. All signs pointed to her cheating. But she said that nothing was happening. She said that Harry would come over occasionally to discuss business, etc., but never stayed the night. I chalked it up to me being paranoid and continued on as if nothing was wrong. But there was always this feeling that something wasn't right. It was close to 6 months after that I discovered she had been lying to me. I had just finished up doing a rather large contract with a new company and negotiations had wrapped up earlier than I had anticipated. So instead of sticking around for the next few days, I decided to pay for an early flight home and surprise everyone. Fast forward a few hours and I drive into my hometown and down the alley behind my house so that I could get into the house without being seen and surprise Catherine. Some part of me was curious, however, as to whether this mystery car was there. Sure enough, there was a car that was blocking the back entrance gate. I was confused for a moment, wondering if it had just been a neglectful neighbor parking, only to realize that it was indeed Harry's car. If it hadn't been for the high hedge line that I had put in a few years back for privacy, I may have well driven past my own place. Pulling up behind his car, I got out and thought it was strange that he was there so late, as she claimed that he had always left by now. As I approached the back of the house, I saw something that made my stomach drop. In my kitchen, Catherine and Harry were going at it hammer and tong. I froze. Time stopped. There was my close friend having sex on my kitchen bench with my girlfriend. I didn't know what to do. So many questions were there running through my head. Was this real or was I dreaming? Why were they having sex in my house? Feeling defeated, I turned and left without them seeing me. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity. I was crying, hard, but the sadness quickly turned into anger. The same kind of anger I felt towards those that were responsible for Rachel's death. I wanted to hurt them, badly. As a pacifist, I don't believe in violence. It was then I knew I was going to punish them and destroy their lives. And what better time to start than now? I moved my car back up the alley far enough away from the driveway that I could still see Harry's car, and then walked back to the gate where I could see into the house and called her phone. They were still going for it when it rang. They both looked at the caller ID and did a double take when my name came up. I could see that she was considering answering it, and they let it ring out. After a few moments, they were back at it again, and I dialed once again. This time she did answer. As she was answering, I hung up and made my way back to my car. As soon as I did, she called me back. She asked why I was calling as late as I was, and I told her that I was about 10 minutes from home and didn't want to scare her coming in. She, obviously, was shocked and acted happy that I was coming, and the call ended very quickly after she said she was going to get up and change into something. I said bye and hung up. A few moments later, Harry came peeling through the gate and, still half naked, jumped into his car, took off like a bat out of hell. I smiled a little, knowing the fear that both of them would be feeling from being so close to being caught. I waited a few moments before turning my car into the same place Harry had been moments earlier. The night was fairly uneventful afterwards, and it wasn't until after she was asleep that I got up and went to my office down the hall. I couldn't sleep, I needed a plan, and plan I did. The revenge. My mother always taught me to be a pacifist and to allow cosmic karma to take its course, but on this occasion I decided that karma could use a helping hand. I decided to punish them separately, but destroy both of them. I knew that Harry had a drug habit, nothing major, but he kept it very private. I only knew about it accidentally after seeing some coke and weed left out at his place, but pretended I hadn't seen it when he had made attempts to cover it up. I began calling some of my more unsavory clientele and made a few discreet inquiries into obtaining some samples that they were willing to part with. A few days later, I had a decent enough stash for my plan to work. About a month later, I had friends, including Harry, around for a barbecue night. After making sure that I sufficiently liquored up Harry, I told him to stay the night and sleep it off. In the early hours of that morning, I took the drugs and an assortment of my personal belongings and placed them at various places around his car, with the biggest stash in his tire well, confident that he wouldn't find them over the few months as the rest of my plan took effect. I locked the car up and went inside to sleep. I also placed some more drugs and personal items in his house after driving him home because he was still too drunk to drive. A few days later, I staged a break-in by smashing the back pane of my back door into my kitchen and leaving it open before heading into the city for a flight. I had several messages the moment I landed, one from my clearly panicked mum, who had found the back door smashed open and had called the police, one from Catherine in tears, and one from the local police asking me to call. After returning all the calls, I informed the police I was away on business and that I would be back the following week to talk with them. While away, I got Catherine to stay with my parents until after I got back, and asked my dad to organize one of the local security companies to install cameras and an alarm system after getting the go-ahead from the police, as to not ruin the scene of the crime. After getting home, I did the usual, "My God, I can't believe this has happened," and "Why would anyone do this?" routine. After doing a thorough check of everywhere, Finding that the items I had taken were missing and filing a police report, I had the security company's rep talk Catherine and I through how the cameras and alarm system worked. Then came the question I had been waiting for. The question of what happens if we are doing some business and don't want it recorded. She acted a bit shy asking this question, but I knew exactly the reason she was asking. He assured us that this was a question he got asked a lot. We were shown on the home computer, if we wanted to be doing things without it being recorded, how to stop the recording for certain cameras so that we could protect her modesty. As I was walking him out, I asked him if cameras were turned off, could a notification be sent out just as a security precaution. He came back in and helped me through how to set up email notifications and left shortly after. Fantastic! All I had to do was wait. At this stage, I approached r/legal advice for some help in relation to couples law in my country. I needed to make sure that my upcoming plan could legally be done, and that I would not be forced to pay out any money or equity to Catherine, as I didn't know if we were classified as a de facto couple or not. Being the sole benefactor of Rachel's estate, I didn't want to be left with any nasty surprises where Catherine could take any of the estate away from me. Shout out to those guys and gals there, as they helped me get in contact with a great lawyer who assured me, due to the fact that although we had been dating for close to 4 years, we had not been living together long enough to be classified as de facto. And because I was paying all the utilities on the property that she was living in and didn't pay rent, showed that she had no legal standing to make a financial claim against me. Just to be sure though, he drew up what I felt was a pretty ironclad document, just in case there was any legal trouble. The following week, my work had approached me and offered me a promotion to move back into the city and run the team that I was a part of, meaning I wouldn't need to travel as often and be in the one location, and due to the success of being located in my hometown, that they were considering having 3 to 5 representatives spend 1 to 2 weeks in the larger surrounding towns, including my hometown, as a part of my team. I said yes and began the process of beginning my transfer, which would take about 6 weeks. Perfect, more than enough time to gather all my evidence. Upon getting back to my hometown the following week, I began to start in motion the rest of my plan. I asked Harry to approve 1 week's worth of vacation for Catherine for 2 weeks' time. I wanted to send her and a friend or two away on a retreat before I made the biggest decision of my life for a second time. He jumped up and gave me a huge hug, congratulating me on being prepared to take the leap again. I hugged him back tight, but not the way I think he imagined it at the time. He agreed and blocked out the week for me. I asked him not to say anything to anyone, as I wanted to make it as big a surprise as I could. I knew it would spread like wildfire around the office regardless, but that was my plan. That night, I told Catherine that I had booked her and 2 friends to go on a tropical spa resort, all expenses paid, for a week. No questions asked. Pick 2 friends and come back to the biggest surprise of her life. She screamed like a kid who had just been told that all the candy in the shop was hers to have. I then told her that the following week I was going to spend it in the city preparing for a large client who was one of my biggest accounts and needed some people in my team to help before flying out the following week, and I wouldn't be home until Monday that she was leaving, so I wouldn't be able to see her, which seemed to disappoint her, but I told her it would be worth it when she returned. What I failed to tell her was that I decided to take 2 weeks vacation on the other side of the country, mentally preparing myself for the shitstorm that was about to erupt the moment she stepped foot on the plane, as well as enjoying my first stage of freedom. On Sunday, 2 weeks later, I flew back and began driving home. Once getting there, I did a quick pass by my house, and sure enough, Harry's car was there. Like the first night I had caught them, I parked a little ways back and checked the cameras. Asleep, in my bed. No surprise, honestly, as I had recorded them constantly to do this over the 2 weeks I had been away. I then made my first call to the police, blocking my caller ID. I told them that I was one of the neighbors and saw someone hanging around in their car in the alley behind my house, and occasionally passing something through windows to passing cars, while also looking into my yard, and I was concerned that they were dealing drugs or going to break into someone's property. I gave them his license plate and description. They said they would have someone there in a few minutes, so I thanked them and hung up. I then called Catherine and told her I was about 10 minutes from home and that I knew she was flying out tomorrow, but desperately wanted to surprise her. Looking back at the footage now, I laugh at the commotion that I am surprised I didn't hear. In a few short seconds, Harry was half dressed and flying out the back door to his car. At that point, I couldn't have asked for a more perfect scene. As Harry was peeling away, one of the police cars rounded the corner behind me and saw Harry driving away fast, and gave chase. After pulling in, greeting an excited Catherine and doing all the couple things, she fell asleep again. I, on the other hand, couldn't sleep a wink. The next day, her and her friends were bundled into a car. After they drove away, I had to wait a few hours, but I began to execute my plan. I called my friend who was a removalist and apologized for the late notice, but needed my place packed and moved on Friday. After agreeing on a time, I told him that he would need to take certain boxes to a storage facility, which he said wasn't an issue. Then I began packing Catherine's belongings. Later that day, I got a call from the police for me to come and identify some property that they had apprehended from a suspect the previous night that fit the description of property I had reported stolen. I grinned to myself, happy that my plan for Harry had grown to fruition, and replied that I would be there shortly to collect it. Of course, when I got there, some of the items were still unaccounted for, due to the fact that they must have still been in his house and they hadn't searched there yet. By this stage, the town was buzzing with news. Events in my hometown don't stay secret for long. Harry was disgraced and promptly fired for his possession of drugs and stolen property, and our respective bosses on behalf of the company had extended a formal apology towards me during the week. That night, I went to my parents' house and told both mine and Rachel's parents what had happened, omitting certain details, and that I was moving back to the city after being promoted, but Catherine wouldn't be a part of it. They were pretty upset initially that I hadn't let them know what was going on, but were happy I was handling everything maturely and I hadn't sunk to her level. Though they didn't agree with ghosting Catherine. But after some drinks, laughs, and tears, I went home. On Friday afternoon, after a busy week of organizing cleaners for the following week, the real estate to put my house on the rental market, and various other tasks at my hometown's office, I packed some things into my car and drove to my parents' place and said goodbye before the drive. Before leaving, I went to Becky's house. Becky had been one of Rachel's closest friends growing up. She was the only other person who knew what was happening, minus the details about Harry. Without her help, I wouldn't have been able to organize everything as quickly as I had. I gave Becky a large manila folder with my gathered evidence of her cheating, as well as the letter and a few other legal documents from my attorney stating that she was ordered not to contact me, and the details of how to access her belongings located at the storage unit I had rented out. After a quick goodbye, I left and drove back to the city. On Sunday, I woke up to several missed calls, voice messages, and text messages. Turns out Catherine had come home early after being alerted to something being afoot in town, only to find an empty house and a for rent sign out front. Freaking out, she had gone to my parents, who closed the door on her the moment they answered, forcing her to call everyone until she managed to somehow be contacted by Becky and told that she had a package for her. I was told that she didn't take too well to that, as I fully well knew at that point from the numerous angry texts and voice messages from her accusing me of setting up Harry, of being deceitful, etc. I was worried that she might show up at my front door, but nothing ever happened. 5 weeks after leaving and being promoted, I write this out for you, dear reader. Granted, it's long, and it took a few rewrites to shorten it down from my initial 14 pages, double what the story is now, but I feel that most of what is said is important enough for the story.